You're listening to the Patriot Nation podcast.
Into another edition of the Patriot Nation podcast presented by FanDuel, the official sports wagering partner of CLNS Media. Go to fanduel.com/Boston to sign up today. It's your boy Pat Lane, as always, here with my guy Matt St. Jean. And today we are joined by one of our favorite people in the entire world. You know him, you love him. He's a Patriot supporter for NBC Sports Boston and the host of the other show you should be listening to in the offseason, the Next Pats podcast. It's Phil Perry. Phil, thanks for coming on, man.
Anytime, guys. There's always stuff happening with this team, so there's always stuff to talk with you about.
Yes, there is.
They're breaking the news just for us. I feel special.
Yeah, they're going to be looking for a new offensive coordinator. So Bill O'Brien's out, and who is in now is going to be really interesting to see. This is, you could argue, the most important hire Gerard Mayo will make. I don't know if how much say he's going to have in the GM hire. That's probably more important for the organization, but the most important hire he's going to make, I'm sure I'll have some input from ownership, is going to be whoever's shaping this offense moving forward, right?
Yeah. And that's, we had talked about it already on the show before, and you hired Gerard Mayo, who of course is a defensive-minded person, right? But you're not hiring, you look at the Texans, you're not hiring a defensive coach or an offensive coach. You're hiring a leader is who you're hiring. Dan Campbell's a good example of that too. You're not hiring a specialist to do something. You're hiring a guy that can lead the men out, right? A leader of men. And then he's got to get a good offensive coordinator and a good defensive coordinator. And we talked on here about, we didn't necessarily love the idea of Bill O'Brien coming back because we thought some change would be good. And, obviously in this case, Bill O'Brien has accepted the position at Ohio State to be the offensive coordinator there. So you got to assume that the Patriots communicated to him that he was not going to be coming back, because otherwise it seems strange he would take the same job at a college instead of in the pros, right? So they probably said, yeah, we're probably moving on. Go find a job somewhere else if you can find one.
Well, I would
definitely going to be huge.
I would say this. You may be right. I also would say I think it was probably a pretty hard year for Bill O'Brien. And things are obviously in flux here. New head coach. You're going to have a quarterback, I'm sure. And so while this may have been the Patriots saying, hey, you're probably not going to be back here, well, I could certainly see that. I could also see the other side of it too, where he might, in his heart of hearts, even though he's got family here and it felt like a great situation, and it's my understanding it was still under contract, it wouldn't stun me if he felt like it was a good time to try to find something else either.
Yeah, I imagine he's going to have a lot more, control over his personnel at Ohio State than he would have at in New England, at least based on what we heard coming into this past season.
Yeah, well, I honestly, guys, I think when he got here, he was fine with the staff. That wasn't an issue, and he got to bring his tight ends coach.
That's right.
And he liked the other guys. And, if there were relationships strained over the course of the season, I could certainly understand that. You're the worst offense in football when it comes to scoring points. That's bound to happen. But my understanding of it at the time was that there was not a lot of pushback in terms of, hey, I need Coach X for my running backs and Coach Y for my receivers and Coach Z for my offensive line. And if you don't allow me that, I'm going to be pissed off all year, and you're going to read about it. It was an odd situation. It was certainly a hodgepodge of offensive coaches, from holdovers from two previous regimes, essentially, two previous different coordinators who had different offenses. And so that part is unusual. There is no doubt about it. But I don't think the say over the staff was the biggest issue for him. I think it was the fact that they were just a brutal offense and they did not have much talent. And I think it weighed on him. I think it It was draining to a large degree for somebody like Bill O'Brien. So tough year, not a fun year. I could understand why he would, even if he was asked to move on, why he might want to move on of his own volition.
Yeah, one of those mutual partings, kind of like Belichick had, right?
Yeah, and I'm not saying that that's what happened. I don't know that, but
it could have been, though.
Based on what I know in terms of what kind of year it was for him, that wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, makes sense. All right, so who do you think? So now that Billy O is gone, and I'm sure it'll come out in the next few days as to why or some of the reasoning behind it. But who is on the short list for you? Who are the guys? The Patriots interviewed guys last year for the offensive coordinator spot, right? Guys like Sean Jefferson and guys like that. So is there, who's on that short list for you this year? Is it guys that interviewed last year? Is it brand new guys? Is it guys on the staff? What do you think?
I think it's going to be new guys. I'm not sure it's going to be guys on the staff because I'm not sure. Although Adrian Clem did interview for the offensive coordinator job last year, if I remember that correctly, and ended up obviously getting hired to be the offensive line coach.
Yeah.
I'm not sure there's anybody on the staff who necessarily would qualify. Troy Brown's been around for a while, and I know I believe he's going to be an offensive coordinator down at the Senior Bowl this year. I think I saw that the other night. He was the head coach for I think they were the West team, which didn't make a whole lot of sense, but the Patriots were coaching the West team at the Shrine game last year.
Oh, boy, yeah.
And he was the head coach. So he's been sort of in training for a higher level job these last couple of years now, but I don't think anybody necessarily on the staff right now would qualify as offensive coordinator. I think it's going to be an open search. It'll be interesting to see if Josh McDaniels is interested at all. Would he rather go with Bill Belichick? That's something he knows. That's an offense that Bill Belichick respects. And I do wonder if the Patriots, as they're currently situated, understanding that they might be adding a young quarterback with a premium asset and the number 3 overall pick, do you want that guy trying to run Josh McDaniels' offense? And it went well for Mac Jones as a rookie back in 2021. But I think Mac Jones was, in terms of his processing and his readiness to run that kind of offense, I think he was advanced. And I know that sounds crazy to say now, given where Mac Jones has ended up, but that was what everyone in the league would tell you. I remember talking to coordinators who were incredibly impressed just because they would say things like, well, look at, this was actually at the end of last year. So he was coming off of the awful season with Patricia and Judge, and the reasoning for why Mac Jones was still a viable player was because look at what he did as a rookie. Quarterbacks don't, generally speaking, have a lot of success in their first years in Josh McDaniels' offense. The St. Louis Rams experiment for McDaniels went horribly. Derek Carr did not play well in his first year in Josh McDaniels' offense. But last year, you had this amalgamation of Jimmy Garoppolo and Aiden O'Connell and Brian Hoyer, and it hasn't gone well. It hasn't gone well. In generally speaking, I think it's considered a complex offense, a voluminous playbook, and relatively difficult to pick up. Do you want to be handing that to a rookie quarterback that you just took at 3 overall, who has run nothing like that in all likelihood in the college game? So I think this is going to be an outside. If I had to bet, I wouldn't completely rule out McDaniels because there's a great relationship with ownership there. He knows Mayo clearly. But my guess is they're going to be looking at that McVay tree or that Shanahan tree and seeing all the success that some young quarterbacks have had in those systems. And even if there's not a well-established, long-standing relationship between Mayo and whoever that offensive coordinator is from one of those systems, that might be what ends up being most palatable for them.
Well, the name that comes to mind when you mention them, you've got the current offensive coordinator for the Rams, Zach Robinson, somebody who, started in New England and actually had some overlap with Gerard Mayo with their time with the Patriots. And the tight end coach there is a name familiar to all of us in Nick Caley, somebody who just went out there from New England. That I think that's like the first pairing of names that comes to mind if you want to go get somebody from that system is to bring in the offensive coordinator and the tight end coach. They both have ties to New England, some relationships with Mayo, but it is very much an external system, something young, something fresh. And another former recent player there as a coordinator.
Yeah, and that Zach Robinson's name certainly, I think, should be in consideration. I know he's already interviewing for OC jobs. He's not the offensive coordinator there, but he's the pass game coordinator, and he's the quarterbacks coach.
Yeah.
And he's been the assistant quarterbacks coach for a couple different seasons there with Sean McVay. So he's worked really closely alongside McVay for a while now. He was the 7th round pick of the Patriots back in 2010. If anybody remembered that and those specific details, like kudos. I know it's a Patriots fans podcast, but even me as a draft nerd, like if you remember 7th round picks from over 10 years ago, like congratulations. And so that's a name they should consider. Kaylee's a name that I think they should consider too. The one thing about Kaylee, I've had some people really be very complimentary of him that I've spoken to league-wide lately because they believe he's going to be an offensive coordinator and soon. The one thing he hasn't done yet is be a quarterbacks coach. And that's what a lot of these teams, generally speaking, are looking for. If they're going to be calling plays, they're going to be working with a young quarterback. And so that's one area where, what might be interesting to see is if Zach Robinson leaves, if all of a sudden you see Nick Caley next year as the pass game coordinator and quarterbacks coach in LA with Sean McVay, and then he's a coordinator somewhere in 2025. So I would mention those two names. The other name that I would mention, who is a McVay connection and a Patriots connection, a little bit like Caley, but in a different way, is Shane Waldron, the OC, the Seattle Seahawks. I think technically still, although they just blasted Pete Carroll out of there, so he's probably going to be looking for a job. But has been with the Patriots before and in a variety of different capacities. I believe he was tight ends coach in 2009, but he's been an offensive assistant, and I think he even worked in some personnel capacities very early on in his career. He went to Tufts, he went to Phillips Andover, so he has some New England ties. I think he coached at BB&N as well. People out there are familiar with the Independent School League football products that are in the greater Boston area. So he's a guy that I would consider too, just because he has sort of been, in some ways, although he's been in Seattle since 2021, he's been McVay's sort of right-hand man offensively for a while. Going back to their days even in Washington, he left Washington, ended up in LA with McVay, and spent several years there with him at in important jobs. And so that's a name that I think they should be looking at too.
Yeah, well, you go through his Wikipedia, right, and it's like offensive quality control coach in New England, tight ends coach in New England. Again, when Gerard was here, then UMass for a while, then Redskins, and then the Rams from 2017 and 2020 in a variety of roles, and now he's with Seattle. So it certainly is. That's an interesting spot. And, as much as Seattle's offense isn't necessarily blowing anyone away, Geno Smith, not great. Okay, but not great. He looked pretty darn good last year. So
yeah, he made Geno Smith a lot of money last year.
Right.
However involved he was in Geno's explosion last year, that's a feather in Waldron's cap potentially
for sure. And if you're going to get a guy, we're going to talk about the quarterbacks at some point coming up here, but if you're going to get a guy with some mobility, a guy that can move a bit, which we all kind of hope is going to be the case, you need someone that can do that has that in their repertoire. And for me, I don't see anyone on the roster that can do that. And so they have to go out there and get someone, whoever it might be. I know Matt is a Michigan fan, so we all know who he wants as the quarterback. But nevertheless, whoever it is, it's got to be someone with some mobility, I think.
Yeah, and there's a few other guys that are sort of from a similar tree, that Shanahan McVay tree. Clint Kubiak, who's Gary Kubiak's son. He was the offensive coordinator, quarterbacks coach for the Vikings for a bit. Now he's the pass game coordinator for the Niners. That's a name. It wouldn't stun me if he ends up getting some interviews. He's 36, 37, somewhere in there. So it feels like it's about the right time for him to get some looks like that, especially after working with Brock Purdy and helping that offense look the way it's looked. And then Dan Pitcher is a quarterbacks coach for the Bengals. He's obviously worked with Joe Burrow the last few years, and again in a relatively similar system from that tree. So maybe that's somebody that they'd bring in for a look as well.
Yeah. Any chance you think Sean Jefferson comes back? And I don't know. I don't think he's qualified to be, certainly not as qualified as these guys are to be the OC, because I want an OC that has that quarterback's coach background, because we probably are going to be dealing with a rookie quarterback. But, I don't, maybe Troy's a very good coach. I don't know, but I've seen nothing out of the wide receivers lately. Right. And maybe, maybe the situation is that, it's something similar. He was in Carolina last year, so it's maybe something similar with Carolina where you haven't seen a ton of growth. But I feel like Troy maybe could go somewhere else in the staff. But wide receiver coach, I just feel like isn't it for him.
Yeah, I'm not sure. That's a tough one. It's like, is it the chicken or the egg, right? That receiver position has obviously been tough, but has Troy had much to work with there.
Yeah, right. That's true.
Talent-wise, that's been a mess of a position for several years now. As far as Jefferson is concerned, he's a really well-respected guy, and he's been associate head coach for the Cardinals. I think that's where he was last year when the Patriots interviewed him.
Yeah.
So he's been around. He's very well-respected, and so it wouldn't shock me, especially if Mayo. One of the things that Mayo said to me in our one-on-one that we did, which is on the Expats podcast, if people want to find that, I believe if that's not posted now, it'll be posted early tomorrow morning, was that he's going to be encouraging of former players to come back. And, whether that's visits, guest speaker opportunities, or coaching opportunities. It wouldn't surprise me if, he is looking for people he trusts, and that he understands, they understand what it takes to do in the moment when the reps are live, and how to get players to respond and react the way that Mayo wants them to. So, it wouldn't shock me if he's making calls to players right now and trying to see, gauge their interest, especially guys that would have backgrounds on the offensive side of things. Because I think if all things being equal, he'd like to keep the defensive staff as similar as possible to the staff they had last year. Why change it? That went pretty well. But Sean Jefferson fills, obviously, Patriots fans know, like he fills that mold, if that's what you're looking for. If you like, it's what they're doing in Detroit, right? How many former players on the coaching staff in Detroit? And they really feel like that's helped them. That brings something to the table that some others might not. So it wouldn't shock me at all if he was back for another interview this year.
That's a good point. And I do think, with these kids now, I do wonder if they respond more to the former players. And you also see now so many more former players trying to get into coaching, whereas I feel like, yes, there are former players that got into coaching before, but I don't know if it was as prevalent as it is now. It may have been, because, there are, Herm Edwards is a former player. There's a bunch of guys that are former players, but I just don't know if it's quite as prevalent, if it's more prevalent now than it was,
I think coaches are realizing, whether they're former players or not, that one of the most important things you can do as a coach right now is get your players to play for you and get them to respond to you in a very real and at times emotional way. And so getting that connection with the player, to be able to reach them in that way and get them to respond to your coaching in that way, I think can be a real barrier. But if you're a former player, part of that barrier comes down almost immediately, because the player that you're trying to coach has a almost built-in respect for who you are, because they understand what you went through to get to that point in your life. Okay, this guy played. Okay, I know he knows what he's talking about. There's an instant credibility that comes with that might just allow for a quicker adaptation to a new coaching staff. Okay, I might not know this guy, but I know what his past is. And so I'm going to eat up everything he tells me because he had a real career in the league. He won games that mattered in this league. And maybe I haven't. Maybe I'm a rookie. Maybe I'm a second-year guy. I'm still on my first contract. I'm trying to make as much money as that guy did. I'm trying to win as many games as that guy did. So I better listen. And so that, there's real logic in going with the former player route. It's not just so that the coaching staff roster looks good, when you're logging on to patriots.com. It's, those guys and their words carry real weight when the players in the meeting room know what your resume is.
Speaking of that relationship, I know you were there for Mayo's introduction. What was the reaction like from the players that were in attendance there? And also, do you have any reaction to which players were there in attendance? I know Mac Jones was one of them.
Yeah, he was. I think he was the only offensive person that was there. I'm not sure I saw an offensive coach. Now I was right up the front row for the press conference. So there were some people that were behind me that I genuinely didn't see. Not a lot of offensive people aside from Mac Jones. Defensively, Juwan Bentley, Jonathan Jones, they were there and spent a lot of time there. Devin McCourty obviously was there, ended up asking a question, and was able to talk to some of those guys after the fact for a little bit. So from a player standpoint, a lot of guys aren't still here in town, so I don't blame them for not being here en masse for the announcement. I would say the entire front office was there, and almost the entire defensive coaching staff. Although I didn't see either Belichick, which makes sense. Might have been a little bit awkward. Even if they have a good relationship with Mayo, which is my understanding they do, he's still replacing your dad. I don't know. So that maybe that was intentional on their end, but so real presence there, and I think the players are thrilled. Honestly, I think they're over the moon. The guys that were there, Bentley, Jones especially, they've had a chance to get to know this guy, as a coach since 2019. And they'll tell you they love the guy and they love his honesty and a lot of the things and ways in which Mayo acted at the podium. That's how he is. That's how he's in the meeting room. And so, I think it's amusing to them to see him in that setting, sitting next to his boss, everybody's boss, and be correcting him on, pronunciations and, talking about race, very openly at the put like that. That's the guy they know. And they know they're going to basically get the same person, or they're assuming they're going to get the same person when he, officially starts as head coach and he's in those meeting rooms and he's on the practice field with them. So, he is very intentional about creating relationships with these guys. And so, especially the guys he's been around for a few years now, they feel like they know him really well and they feel like he gets the best out of them because he's gone out of his way to get to know them really well. And I think he was pretty open about how, human interaction and the way that people communicate with each other now in the building is going to be something that he's really focused on, because it's clearly there's going to be a very different approach, Mayo versus Belichick. That's obviously very clear.
I think it's been clear the way everybody's talked about it too, that it seems like that may have been the biggest issue the last couple years in the building was it's not like people had bad relationships, but it does seem like things were a little bit testier. I don't think that's super shocking. Bill Belichick is a hard coach. That's part of the appeal. And also when you aren't winning, it's a harder message to sell. And when you don't have a 6-time Super Bowl winning quarterback in the locker room to back up his message and be a leader from the players, it's also harder to sell. So I think, why they went in this direction makes sense. And it's kind of obvious. We'll just have to see, it's easy to say all this stuff in the off season when when it's, the first week and it's a breath of fresh air, how this is when it's, how it is in week 3, if they just come off, losing back-to-back games, they're 1-2 to start the season. That'll be another thing when and if we get to that point.
I mean, if they're not winning, that was one thing I asked him, really trying to pull some some football philosophy out of him in the one-on-one that we did, because you really didn't, if you were as a fan, if you were interested to know what Gerard Mayo is about as a head coach, what he wants his football team to be defined by, you didn't necessarily get that at the press conference. I think back to, this a few years ago now, but Detroit, when they, hired Dan Campbell and he has his knee biting press conference, right? And, he's very open about, okay, this is what we're going to be, relentless. I'll replace knee biting with relentless. And they use the word grit, and grit has become their word. That's their brand. It's written on the walls there in Detroit. They're talking about it after the game the other day, first playoff win in however long. And Brad Holmes, one of the first things he brings up with is how they've attacked their jobs with grit. And so they're very clear and open about having a defined identity. And I tried to ask Mayo I think I left it as sort of a fill in the blank. The Patriots under Gerard Mayo will be about what? Expecting one of those adjectives. And toughness, relentlessness, grit, something. And he said winning. And he's like, listen, and I kind of laughed. I'm like, well, but how do you get there? And he's like, hey, if we don't win, it doesn't, none of the other stuff matters. So let's start with that. Day one here, as we sit right here, what we're going to be about is winning. And however we get there is how we get there. That's what I'm focused on right now. So it is easy to speak in these terms now. I do wonder, what their guiding light will be when stuff goes wrong. Because, the closest thing that I think we got to a football philosophy yesterday, he said it to me in our one-on-one. I believe he said it to Mike Reese as well. He sort of referred back to some comments or some traits, I should say, that Bill Belichick was always promoting. Yeah. Smart, tough, dependable. He even said to me in our interview, I believe the way he put it was, coach always says. He's still calling him coach. So on the one hand, he is trying to point out, I'm different from Bill. I'm not Bill. We're going to do X, Y, and Z, and it's all going to be very different. You're not even going to recognize it under Gerard Mayo. Well, he also has this other stuff that, he thinks works. Hard work works. How many times did he say that? That's a Bill Belichick thing too. So he did sort of, in some ways, I hesitate to say paid homage, but there was a doffing of the cap in some respects in Bill Belichick's direction, because that's the system, that's the philosophy under which Mayo has worked for so long as a player and a coach. So, if he's gonna refer back to what he knows. So smart, tough, dependable. That might be what they're trying to pursue this year, and that's okay. I think his hire is all about, and the reason why the Crafts are so comfortable going to him without even conducting interviews is what he represents, which is the ability to carry over the things they like and keep them because he was a part of those things, but also change what needs to be changed. And so you're going to get it. The message is going to be delivered in a very different way, and how the team goes about its business behind the scenes and interacts with each other on a daily basis is going to be very different, but some of the other stuff might remain the same. And it'll be interesting to see just how that all meshes together.
Yeah. And I think that's fascinating. I mean, and because you're right, not only did he grow up, he got drafted by the Patriots, he retired as a Patriot, all of his coaching is with the Patriots. It's not as though, anything, he hasn't done anything else. He hasn't been anywhere else. He hasn't seen anything else. It's just been the Patriots. And so in some respects, you have to look at it and say, well, where else is he going to get his stuff from? Now, that doesn't mean that he doesn't have interpersonal skills that maybe Belichick didn't have. But at the same time, it's like some of the stuff that's come out lately, I'm like, no one has said a bad word about Bill Belichick. Outside of Asante Samuel, Cassius Marsh, and sometimes Ted Johnson, none of his players have said anything bad about him. So, clearly he had pretty good interpersonal skills, right? And maybe it was just because he, they won with him. And so, it was hard and he was a pain in the ass sometimes, and, but they won with him, so it doesn't matter. But for me, I just look at it and say well, yeah, fine. Maybe he'll have better relationships with the guys, and maybe He'll be more of a player's coach, quote unquote. But like, what does that mean? Like, maybe he's a guy like Dan Campbell, because Dan Campbell might be a player's coach. He's a hard ass. Like, he's pushing those guys to work their asses off, right? He's not. And so you don't necessarily have to be, take it easy all the time to be a player's coach. And maybe that's what he's going for. But I just think that, I don't know. I'm curious to see how different it really looks. He can say it's going to look different. I'm curious to see how different it's really going to look.
What I would say is, in terms of the player interaction, and the relationship building, if it's not vastly different, something's gone horribly wrong.
Yeah.
It needs to be different. There needs to be a different level of connection from the head coach, especially to the younger players. Now, you're right that, Bill Belichick's he's been a great coach for a long time. And so you're not going to hear a lot of people bash the way he's done things. But I can tell you, there are players, guys that aren't even that young. Like, I've talked to players this year, third, fourth year in the league, and they're talking to me about how they feel like they just this season, again, third or fourth year in under Bill Belichick, feel like they kind of have broken down a wall with Bill. And like, I really felt like I could talk to Bill this year. And I'm sitting there as a reporter and I'm saying, you've been here for 3 years and or 4 years. And in the 3 previous years, you felt like you couldn't talk to your head coach. How is that healthy?
Yeah.
You didn't feel like you could go up and ask the guy a question? And so on the one hand, I say that, and it's surprising to me. On the other, I kind of get it. Bill Belichick can be an intimidating guy, and he has been a legend for a long, long time. These guys grew up, especially the younger ones. They're in diapers when the guys,
winning
got
Super
3
Bowls.
Super Bowls already. And so he just is viewed in this light that is through no fault of either parties, really. Bill's 72. These guys are 22. Like, I don't know how he would necessarily approach it, to just go up to guys and just start shooting the breeze with them and asking them to come in and, talk ball randomly over the course of the day. And he probably is doing that with some. So I don't want to act like I'm speaking for the entire locker room here. I can just tell you, some guys didn't feel like they had a real relationship with the head coach. And that's not a crime by any stretch on Bill Belichick's behalf, because it's impossible. You've got 65 guys in there. It's really difficult to have heart-to-hearts with all of them. But I think Mayo, in terms of the relationship part of it's just going to work a little bit differently. For the vast majority of Bill's head coaching career, players didn't need some of that stuff the way they need it now. It's just a different game. It's a different job. The job goes way beyond game planning and teaching techniques and teaching concepts and making in-game decisions. It's about relationship building, I think, way more than it ever has been. And I think it's why you're seeing guys like Dan Campbell, or on the other end of the spectrum, not a former player, although he played in college, Ivy League, but we'll give him that. He's a smart guy. Mike McDaniel. Mike McDaniel's not a hard ass who's going to, be cursing guys out and then
that's true. That's very
and
true.
then ignoring them in the hallways. Literally not looking at them as he walks by them in the hallway. That's not going to be Mike McDaniel's approach. Everybody's a player's coach now. If you're not, you're probably not going to last very long.
Well, and I think I've made this comparison on here before, but in some ways, this reminds me of what the Bruins did recently, where you go from one established veteran head coach to another. And it's not really an indictment of what the previous guy did. It's that you need a change in scenery, a change in vibes in the locker room, different eyes on the same guys to see it in a fresh light and make it work better. And what did you get out of that? The Bruins set their record for most wins in a season, and the other head coach goes on and ends up winning the Stanley Cup. It's a win-win for both sides. And I think I don't know. I think sometimes we almost make obviously, Bill Belichick 6 Super Bowl wins as a head coach. It's a big deal to see him go, but it does feel like at times we can make a little bit too much of it. And sometimes moving on from a head coach isn't necessarily a sign saying this guy failed. It's just, we need something different. It's not an indictment on the previous thing. It's just, we need a shift in what's going on here to make things work and give it a jolt. And that this feels more like that than anything else.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair, Matt, because if he goes to Atlanta and they get a quarterback and all of a sudden they win the division there, like, it doesn't mean, Bill was completely incapable here in New England and he all of a sudden learned how to be a head coach again down in Atlanta. It was time in one place and it had run its course in one place. And in another, it could be exactly what that team needs. And maybe that's the case for Atlanta. Who knows? Maybe they need exactly what he would provide, in terms of discipline and accountability and just tone and seriousness. Like, there are some locker rooms that could probably use a lot more of that. So it'll be interesting to see if he does end up in Atlanta, and it feels like we're not all that far away from that happening. Just how those players respond, because they'll have young players too.
Yeah,
but they may respond in a much, much different way than the guys that Belichick has had here.
Well, I know one guy's going to be pissed is Jonnu Smith, because he finally had a good year in Atlanta, and Belichick's going to come back down and ruin it for him again. But
and maybe how about McDaniels too? And maybe McDaniels is with him as offensive coordinator.
Yeah.
Do you think that's what ends up happening? Do you think it's built to Atlanta with, maybe McDaniels, maybe Patricia ends up there as a defensive guy, a bunch of former coaches that he's been with?
I think it's possible, right? I mean, again, if you're Bill and you don't want to have to completely refresh and reframe every bit of infrastructure that exists with whatever organization he ends up joining, wouldn't you love to just get the band back together and bring them all with you? And, that your infrastructure travels. The one bit about Bill O'Brien leaving the Patriots and going to Ohio State, I don't know if anybody had him going to Ohio State. I think a lot of people thought that he could leave, and if he leaves, he could go with Bill Belichick. And if that happened, okay, now the dominoes are starting to fall. If he's the offensive coordinator in Atlanta with Bill Belichick, well, does Josh McDaniels also want to go? Or does that mean he's available to stay in New England?
Right.
We know he's been around. He was at the game, the season finale. He was at Bill Belichick's press conference. Does that mean he's now available to go down to Atlanta with Bill Belichick? And does that take an option off the board for the Patriots? There's some interesting ripple effects. Yeah, ripple effects for the Patriots in terms of who might be available to them. Now that O'Brien is at Ohio State. Now, again, that said, I don't know how great a fit McDaniels is for New England right now, aside from this, what I've been led to believe in the past, at least the recent past, has been a great relationship with ownership.
Yeah.
And, that matters. So maybe he does end up here in New England, but it looks like that offensive coordinator job with, or for Bill Belichick, wherever he ends up, is going to be open and there for him if he wants it. So that would be really interesting to see who ends up going with Bill and what that means for the Patriots.
Yeah.
Speaking of the coordinator jobs, I had a question from our last show. I was thinking about, they interviewed for the special teams or not. They didn't interview yet, but they requested to interview for the special teams coordinator job. It's my understanding that there are people currently in that job. Does that mean that contracts have expired on the current special teams staff for New England, or are they openly looking to interview people while the job is filled? Do you have any insight there?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, it was reported that they interviewed, they held an interview for the special teams coordinator role. So it means something must have happened with Cam McCord, right? So my guess is that his contract was up. I don't know that for a fact, but I wonder if he would be somebody who goes with Bill Belichick. I think the special teams, it's no secret, had a rough year this year and have had a couple of tough seasons here. So I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. But again, what I just find it fascinating that you have a head coach who hasn't been many other places, and so I would love to know what his Rolodex looks like, right, when it comes to potential assistants, because it's not like he's, there are some coaches who are around his age who are 37, 38, but who've been with over the last 15 years have been with 5 teams and have made connections both on the personnel side and the coaching side. And when they get opportunities to be head coaches, then they can, maybe pluck from those relationships or the relationships they have through their agents. And that's something that Mayo could do as well. But I find it fascinating, because that special teams thing, nobody talks about the special teams coordinator job, right? Everybody's talking about GM and OC and quarterback and all these changes that are about to be made. But the special teams job's a real job. And, until they completely eliminate all kicking plays, which they are dead set on doing, until that happens, that is going to be an important role, whoever gets it.
Yeah. I mean, to your point, like Shane Waldron, who we talked about, right, has been with the Patriots and UMass and the Redskins and the Rams and the Seahawks. And he's like 44? So he's not much older than Mayo, but he's bounced around. Now, of course, he's been a coach a lot longer than Mayo has. But, the point stands that, he's been all over the place, knows a ton of people, and Mayo's just been here. So it's definitely, you wonder what it looks like.
And is it your understanding that Gerard Mayo is the one who is assembling the coaching staff and requesting the interviews? Is he getting help from the front office? Are others involved? Do we have any idea who's behind this process?
Yeah, no, what I believe is these are going to be Gerard Mayo decisions. But he is going to, as he mentioned at his press conference several times, he's going to lean on other people. So he's going to lean on experts. I think when it comes to the offensive side of things, he's going to lean on people he knows who understand that side of the ball and understand what they're looking at league-wide on that side of the ball and what's working, especially with the young quarterbacks. I look at Jordan Love and C.J. Stroud right now. Throw Brock Purdy in there too, even though he's not a first-round pick. Just how beneficial these Shanahan, McVay style offenses can be for these young players, whether it's Bobby Slowick running it or Matt LaFleur running it. It's all from the same family, and so he's gonna lean on people who know these guys. So even if there's not an outright previous connection with some of these guys, I'm sure Mayo and others will do their digging on them and find people who do know these guys a little bit better as they go through the process. But I think it's going to be his choice. And it's actually interesting. One thing now that we're talking about this that he mentioned in our one-on-one was, I asked him essentially, and luckily he doesn't take offense to this when I say it to him. Everybody knows he worked with us at NBC Sports Boston, was on with us on Quick Slants for several years and got to know him there. And so I essentially asked him, what makes you qualified to hire your defensive guy? And you're going to hire the guy who shapes this offense and the future of this offense for, if it goes well, the next several years. And he said, look, I'm probably not going to bat 1,000 my first year. I might get a few hires wrong. Mm-hmm. But ownership is something that can help us here. He's talking about Robert Kraft, Jonathan Kraft. Ownership has the ability and the resources to really help us out with something like the offensive coordinator search, is how he put it, and not so many words. And so that to me is interesting. I would have loved to sit down with him longer to talk about, the details on that. Does that mean he's going to be getting input from them on names specifically? Or are the resources there just the research and analysis that they have on offenses across the league, and so they can pick and choose from what they like based on some of the advanced numbers that they have? So in some way, shape, or form, though, ownership will play a role in who they end up hiring for offensive coordinator too. That's what it sounds like. Again, it's going to be Mayo's call, in my opinion, but he's going to be leaning on others, and in this case, his bosses, which I find interesting.
Yeah. So we got to take a quick break, and then I want to get into some of the college quarterbacks really quick, leading into the draft. just because you are the next Pats guy. You are always focused on the draft and what's coming up in the previous or in the next year. But Murph pointed out, and a few people have talked about it too in the chat as well. GM, do you think it ends up being Elliott Wolf or Matt Groh, or do you think they're going to go out and try to find someone like a Trey Brown or like, and I don't even know who runs the Packers, but Jesus, the Packers have done such a good job of drafting, young, skilled guys outside of the first round in the last few years. Do they go out and try to get somebody like that to bring him in as GM? Obviously, it's going to be after the draft, is what it sounds like. But do you think it will be, internal promotion or someone from outside?
So let's just reiterate what Kraft said during the introductory presser, which is he wants to evaluate the guys that they have in-house.
Mm-hmm.
He does want to appoint someone to make the decisions when the decisions on the roster need to be made, which is coming up soon.
Right.
The window to franchise tag players comes at the end of February. So, you're talking about, and, the combine is before that or right around that same time, end of February. So, like, if you're going to appoint that person, that's going to happen relatively soon. And if that person's going to have in their contract, chief personnel duties, that's a job that I believe, to satisfy league rules, you have to open up to a real search. So I find it interesting because on the one hand, they want to evaluate the guys they have. On the other, if they do want to appoint someone and give that person real power, you have to have interviews. And so,
right.
Which is it? Are you going to evaluate the guys in-house, or are you going to interview guys and then give someone the ultimate decision-making power for the roster? It was a little contradictory, or at the very least, the timelines were a little hard to follow. And so what I would say is this. Since those comments got made by Kraft, there are a number of people in personnel in the league who have been sort of in and around this situation. Maybe guys who had their eyes on this job, guys that are here with the team right now and following it up close. You talk to them, and what they will tell you, they believe, is that they're going to be sticking with the status quo at least through the draft, if not longer. I would not anticipate a general manager gets hired with that title. That's not my expectation. If they give the decision-making power to someone, again, without the title, I think they've got to interview for that. It would make very little sense to me, all that being said, if they do decide to add a body after the draft, to give that person shot calling ability. Because all the shots have been called.
Right.
Every important decision's been made by the time the draft's over. I mean, just about. You can still make trades, and you're going to get to training camp, and you're going to be cutting down to 53, and all that matters. But you just use, you're among the league leaders of cap space that you just used on your free agents in March. And you get the number 3 overall pick, and you're picking again in the 30s at the top of the second round. And then, so you're going to let somebody who's internally here that you're trying to evaluate make all those decisions. And then at the end of all of that, you're going to bring in somebody over the top of them to be their boss.
Yeah, it seems strange.
That doesn't make sense. So I think what might happen, guys, is Elliott Wolf somehow establishes himself as the lead personnel person. And maybe after the draft, who knows, maybe before the draft, although, again, people in the league aren't really expecting a whole lot to be added here. Somebody like a Dave Ziegler gets added. Somebody who has a good relationship with Elliott Wolf, who still has a good relationship with the Crafts, but not as the boss, as another voice, as added brain power to the front office, as a right-hand man, maybe, for somebody like Wolf, who's been a general manager, who's run drafts, obviously not for very long in Vegas, but he had a pretty productive offseason here, in that Nick Caserio, Matt Groh, Scott Pioli, VP of player personnel role. And he only did it for one offseason, 2021. But that was the Mac Jones, Christian Barmore, Ramondre Stevenson draft and that massive free agent spending offseason. So there are some conflicting messages, I would say, coming out of Foxborough in terms of how the personnel is going to be handled. But the people around the situation believe that this is basically going to be it. And if anything, maybe you get a slight change after the draft, but probably not a true general manager.
Yeah, I just think, and I'm very worried. I'm very worried about that because I said so much on Pat's pulpit and here as well that like you're running it back. You're basically, you're hoping that Gerard Mayo is the next Bill Belichick, essentially, that he can coach and find guys, and that worries me. In the same way that drafting Mac Jones is trying to find a new Tom Brady.
What if I say this, Pat? What if, Elliot Wolf is considered a general manager quality person based on his resume, right? He hasn't done it before,
right?
But he's there. I mean, if he's the guy who is essentially running personnel, does that bother you? Or is it the fact that they haven't, that maybe they're not going to open it up to a search? Or, like what's the most bothersome part about it? Because I would say, if Team X was looking for a general manager and take the Patriots out of it, and they interviewed, you mentioned Trey Brown from Cincinnati, he's a really impressive guy, Elliot Wolf and Dave Ziegler, and they came away with, at the end of that process, they decided Elliot Wolf was the best guy to be a general manager. Like that's a realistic thing. So is it the person and his background having worked under Bill, or is it the lack of a process that bothers you most?
So it's a little bit of both. I mean, the thing for me is that I don't know, that 2022 draft was so disastrous, right? And that off season itself, and then the decision making that happened really since Brady's been gone, but even before Brady was gone. And I know I think he got here in 2020, and he was really just a consultant in 2020 when he came here. So he wasn't necessarily the guy, but I believe he was the director of scouting in 2022 when they drafted Tyquan Thornton and they drafted Cole Strange in the first round. By the way, Cole Strange was Ted Karras' replacement. All you have to do was sign Ted Karras, and you don't have to draft Cole Strange in the first round. So, like, those are decisions where it's like,
or Joe Tooney,
or Joe Tooney, or don't trade Shaq Mason, or any of those things like that. Those are the things that's like, that's the stuff that really annoys me. And I wonder if and now listen, the 2023 draft, as bad as the 22 draft was, the 2021 draft, you got Barmore and Ramondre Stevenson out of it, and that's really solid. And the 2023 draft, it looks like you hit a home run with Christian Gonzalez, who got hurt, but you have to assume that's not going to be, it's not going to follow him around. He looked like a stud when he was out there. Keon White looked good. Demario Douglas played really well this year. Marte Mapu played decent. Sidney So looked good at guard, even though you didn't draft him to play guard. Like, so they did hit on a lot of guys this year. So now you look at it and say, okay, well, maybe that's the case. I don't love the fact that the process of it, right? That they're just like, no, fine. And so those are the things that I don't love, where it's like, we're all set now. Elliot Wolf is here. And I just feel like, the old guys and again, I felt like they did the same thing with Brady. The old guy's gone. We'll be fine. Jarrett Stidham's the new guy. We're okay. Everything's good. Don't worry about it. We don't have to draft, Jalen Hurts in the first round. Like it's fine, and that's concerning to me. And again, doesn't mean it won't work out. Maybe Elliot Wolf is fantastic and he becomes the next, Scott Pioli guru and we're all set. But it's just the process of it is what's concerning to me.
Yeah. And I think that's fair. This is an opportunity for the first time in a generation for you to bring in new voices and, learn about some new approaches to football and to potentially bypass that. Again, Robert Kraft did mention something about interviewing the other day. So maybe he has it in his mind, hey, he'd like to give Elliot Wolf 53-man roster power, but he can't do it until he holds interviews. And maybe something happens during the interview process and they fall in love with the guy. That's not Elliot Wolf or Matt Groh. I don't know. Maybe there's the potential for that. So maybe your fears will be allayed at that point, but yeah. I get your concern all the way around. Yeah. I mean, these guys have been involved. They've been here. So they've been involved in some good drafts and some not so good drafts. And, I do think Bill Belichick is the guy who decides, and I think it is frustrating for people in the front office often. I remember being told during that 2022 draft that the buzz out of the building, the morning of the first round of the draft, the buzz in the building, not out of the building, the buzz within the building was, emanating from Bill Belichick's office, essentially was Cole Strange was Bill's guy. This is hours before the draft even starts. And they were picking at the time, I think, at 22 overall.
22, yeah.
So I know that was a head scratcher for people in the building, because it was, well, we don't even know how the board's going to fall. Like, we already know who we're taking at 22. And that happens from time to time. But I think usually those teams that know who they really, really want are up higher in the draft. And so they know they have got a pretty good chance of getting somebody who's really good. It was just UT Chattanooga. That's who Bill wanted. He sort of had his heart set on him, and he knew he could even trade down, which they did. And they passed on the opportunity to draft Trent McDuffie, and they traded down, and they ended up getting the guy that Bill wanted all along. And I think that was frustrating because, again, to the people who spend all year
right
looking at these guys, to not, to go into the draft. And Bill looked at all the research and he watched film, and, I give him credit for that. He doesn't do as much as those other guys, and even he would acknowledge that. They're doing the brunt of the work. But to go into a draft and say, yeah, we're going to take the guard out of UT Chattanooga, if he's there for a slate in the first round, it's like, there's some other good players here that might actually fall to us. Are you sure? And, so I think that was just one example of many where the front office guys, I'm not saying this was Groh or Wolf, they might have loved Cole Strange. They might have loved Tyquan Thornton. They could be as responsible, as anybody outside of Bill for those picks. But I think the reason why Kraft keeps saying he wants to evaluate these guys that are already here is because he knows the people that are on the team right now aren't there because of these guys. They're there because of Bill Belichick. Yeah. And they want to see what these guys can do in terms of player acquisition.
Certainly true. All right, we got to take a quick break. We're running like way far behind on the break. We're going to come back and we'll just talk about the quarterbacks really quick. We'll get you out of here, Phil. We've been going for an hour. You're a champ, dude, and tons, like, so much good. The conversation's been fantastic.
Yes,
so
really good stuff.
So we'll take a quick break. We'll be back, and we'll talk about the rookies coming out and who we might target at the top of the draft. The NFL regular season is wrapping up, but there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets, guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is so easy to use, and there are so many different ways to bet, like live same-game parlays, find bets in the new Explore tab, make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, the best way to find popular parlays, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/Boston and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Must be 21 plus and present in select states. FanDuel is offering online sports wagering in Kansas under an agreement with Kansas Star Casino, LLC. First online real money wager only. $10 first deposit required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit fanduel.com/RG in Colorado, Iowa, Kentucky, Michigan, New Jersey, Iowa, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Tennessee, and Virginia. Hope is here. Visit gamblinghelpline.ma.org or call 1-800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts. Or call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY in New York. All right. So we are back, and we seem to have lost Phil, but there he is. He's back. So, all right. So Patriots sitting at number 3. I think, there's a lot of question marks as to what Chicago is going to do at number 1. They obviously have Justin Fields. There's a chance that they move on from Justin Fields and they're going to want to trade him. Maybe the Patriots will be interested in trading for him. There's a chance that they keep Justin Fields, and in that case, we'll probably be looking to move the number 1 pick, and the Patriots might trade up to the number 1 pick. If you had your choice of quarterbacks, Phil, you had the number 1 overall pick. Let's say the Patriots make a trade, they get to the number 1 overall pick. Who is your guy at number 1? And then follow-up question. If assuming Caleb Williams and Drake May go to 1-2. Now maybe number 1 isn't even Caleb Williams and Drake May for you. But assuming those two go number 2, 1-2, would you take a quarterback at 3?
Yes. And so I need to be consistent here, at least for now, until I have a change in heart. And I reserve the right to change my heart, my mind, and my soul. And
we've seen nothing of these players either. Like, it's early.
Well, yeah, I've watched a fair amount. I've watched a fair amount at this point. They're not going to play any games between now and the draft. And so I've watched a fair amount of all 3 of the consensus top 3 quarterbacks. And I'll answer your second question first, which is, do I still go quarterback at number 3 if Williams and May are off the board? The answer is yes. I go with Jaden Daniels because I might take Jaden Daniels over both Williams and May, even if I had the choice of all 3. That's how much I like Jaden Daniels. I'm a big fan of his game. He is, I think, the definition of the modern day quarterback. And he's coming off of one of the best collegiate seasons we have seen in the SEC. Really good performances against Alabama and Florida, running by guys that are 5-star recruits, and he is a tremendous, tremendous athlete. He can make explosive plays with his legs. He can scramble out of trouble, which I think is a must. That is not a side benefit. That is a must in today's game. He can do that, and he can kill teams by doing that. Really hard, in my opinion, with a guy like that who, if he ran, I think would run somewhere in the 4.4s. And that's from people in the league kind of gauging it, and based on what they're hearing. But that's flying for a guy who's 6'3". I think he's going to be a real problem because of his mobility. But that's not the reason why I'm as big a fan as I am. He's arguably the most accurate deep passer in this year's class. He doesn't turn the ball over. He had 20 interceptions in 5 college seasons. That is remarkable in a college game where you throw the ball as much as you do now. And for a guy who did, especially this past season, throw it down the field quite a bit. This is not all RPOs and screens. So he takes care of the ball. He's explosive with his arm. He's explosive with his legs. I've seen him play from the pocket. I've seen him stand in and take wicked shots to be able to fit the ball into tight windows. He can drive it to the side. He has plenty of arm. I don't think his arm is as good as Caleb Williams's. I mean, I know it's not. I don't think it's as good as Drake May's, but I think it's plenty good enough. And for all those reasons, and for some other, reasons where I might downgrade some of the other guys, to me, he feels like a really smart bet near the top of the first round. A couple of things that I'm a little concerned with is I think Drake May, who I really like, I do. All these guys are really good. So honestly, as it stands right now, if any of them fall to 3, if it's Williams, Daniels, 1-2, take Drake May at number 3.
Yeah.
He's got every tool. He can run. He's got a huge arm. He's a little, I think, less polished on some of the throws you would expect your guy to make. That's what made Brady great, right? Not wanting anybody to be Brady at this point, but what made him great was he made every throw he should make. And then he made some special ones on top of it, but he never missed the throw you expected him to make. And the thing with Caleb Williams, to me, that's a little concerning is the ball security, and just his overall approach offensively, and there are going to be offensive coordinators who are okay with that, the freelance element to his game, because it's part of what makes him so special. He's so physically talented. He had 16 fumbles this past year alone. 16 in one season. And I understand you're trying to be Superman because your defense stinks and you got to score 50 every game just to try to win. And so maybe that's leading to some bad habits. But that scares me a little bit. It's just the volatile nature of his game. Again, whereas compared to Daniels, tougher conference, better defenses, turns it over much less. Now, the one I'll I'll be honest on Daniels. He's not a perfect prospect. He's skinny. He doesn't slide. I think he's, there are some dangers there in terms of injury risk. And he threw to some unbelievable. He's going to have 2 first-round receivers in this year's draft.
Yeah.
So if you want to hold that against them,
guys. Yeah.
if you want to hold that against them, you can hold it against them. Now, Joe Burrow had some unbelievable talent that he was thrown to at LSU too, and he looks like he's a pretty good quarterback. So, you got to surround the guy when he gets to the league. You got to give him what he needs to have success, which the Bengals have done with Burrow, and the Patriots would need to do with Daniels. Anybody would need to do with any of these guys. But there are some things that I really like about Daniels' game, and I feel like the questions about him are a little less pronounced than some of the questions of the other 2 guys.
Now, I think my biggest concern with Daniels, to me, is his age. If let's say we compare Jaden Daniels and Drake May here, I would argue that I think by production, Drake May's best season had better production than Jaden Daniels' best season, and Drake May's best season came in his first year as a college starter when he was 19 years old, and Jaden Daniels' best season comes in his 5th year as a college starter when he is 22, 23 years old. That's something that scares me a little bit if I'm looking at these guys. I actually had somebody send me this article last night, and it's a fantasy football article, but it was one evaluating how often quarterbacks are to become viable fantasy quarterbacks based on their draft position. And they mentioned that for this is just for hit rate, for guys who are 20 or 21 years old in the draft, is a 42% hit rate in the first round. 22 or older, it's a 6% hit rate. For guys who are 3 or 4 year college players, 35% hit rate in the first round. 5 years or more, 0% hit rate. Now, this was written without Joe Burrow in it. Joe Burrow would be somebody who would move those numbers a little bit, and this is since 2012. But I get concerned there, which I think then, if you're looking at youth, leads you to the J.J. McCarthy question as somebody who people have all over the board as a young quarterback in this draft. I have seen Derek Klassen, who is somebody I respect a lot with his quarterback views, I think had J.J. McCarthy as a 4th or 5th round guy. He was quarterback 7 on his boards. And then you go over to Dane Brugler, another guy who's very well respected, has him going at pick 19 in the draft, saying it's a high 2nd round guy who's going to go in the 1st. Do you have any opinion there, Phil?
Yeah, I think he what's really interesting about him is just the lack of reps. They don't throw in Michigan. They just, it's not what they want to do. And so I know, like, my buddy Matt Castle did a lot of Big Ten games this year and watched a lot of J.J. McCarthy. And, he's heard the same thing that I'm sure Dane Brugler is hearing, which is the league likes J.J. McCarthy. Matt Castle, I think, likes but doesn't love. Like, I think he likes some of the tools. He can obviously move around, and he's got a strong enough arm. And when he is asked to throw, my light goes out on me here. We have officially killed my light on the podcast tonight. But I think the age question is a really interesting one, especially at this position, because I think what you're looking for in a young quarterback at the NFL is development when it comes to the mental side of the game. I don't know how many guys come into the league and they're just like physically not ready. I actually remember people saying that about Mac Jones, and maybe part of that was right. Like, oh, he needs to get his arm stronger. His body's not ready to take the punishment. But like, generally speaking, it feels like quarterbacks, when they get to the league, like physically, they kind of are what they are, which I think is true with a lot of guys, maybe outside of some like young tackles, like really like the larger human beings who need to get physically much stronger. It's the mental side of it. And so, at that position, especially if you're going to be taken really highly, would you rather have the little bit older prospect who might have a little bit less of a ceiling because you feel like he's able to sustain whatever the league throws at him early in his career? Or would you rather have the high ceiling guy and hope he figures it out as a pro? That to me is a real question. That's a real debate that teams are going to have it. And maybe they're having it about Daniels versus May, because, the ceiling on May doesn't exist, like it's like he could be really, really special. But if you're not sure and he gets thrown into a bad situation, he plays a lot as a rookie and he ends up getting into some bad habits because he's not fully there, because he wasn't ready, because he's not fully developed. Were you better off going with the older guy who maybe could handle those types of challenges a little bit better? So I do find that interesting. And that maybe I should talk to some league people and see what they would have to say about that. Like, the other thing that's interesting too is, like, with a running back, obviously, or a receiver, maybe to a lesser degree, you don't want the older prospect because the tread on the tires is worn down.
Right.
At quarterback, where, the guys that are good end up playing into their, late 30s now, like, it's insane how long some of these careers are that these guys are having. Maybe age is a little bit less of a concern. So I think you could kind of go both ways on that argument at that position.
Yeah. Well, I think the issue for age at quarterback isn't necessarily where, it's that, and this is Daniels, but this goes for Bo Nix as well as goes for Michael Penix. It's that if you see college defenses for that long and you don't, especially Daniels is a guy who was, a day 3 pick coming into the year through 4 seasons starting, and is now, we're talking top 5 consideration. It took him that long to figure out college defenses, and it took him having 2 receivers who were going in the first round to put up this kind of production. And it doesn't mean that he's a bad player or anything. It means this is part of the evaluative process, asking the questions, figuring out what is it that changed in year 5 for you. What was the difference maker? Was it the talent around you? Were you seeing the field differently? What developed for you? And that's going to be the case for all the veteran quarterbacks. Basically, every quarterback in this draft outside of May, Williams, and J.J. McCarthy is a 4-year or longer guy. I mean, you look down guys who could be available late in the draft, and there's some 6-year, 7-year guys, it feels like, in there.
Yeah, and I think we're gonna be at that point because we get the COVID years, right? And so guys are going back to school and they're spending longer. You know what I mean? Maybe next year, I don't know if you saw this or not. Maybe next year the Patriots will draft Cam McCormick out of Miami, who is going back for his 9th season of college football in 2024. So maybe we'll go after a guy like that. But I think when you talk about the tread on the tires with Daniels, it's a little different, right? He has, 2019, he had 125 carries. 2021, he had 138 carries. 2022, he had 186 carries. This year, he had 135 carries. So he's not just throwing the ball in the pocket. He's running a good amount, right? And that's, roughly 10 carries a game. It's not, he's not running the ball 30 times a game like some of the running backs are, but that's still a good amount. You talk about like 500 carries or so, maybe a little bit more. That's quite a few carries for a guy who you worry about how much can he hold up. And part of it is that he can move and run. And so, you worry about that. At the same time, you mentioned Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow was in school for 4 years. Now, he wasn't a starter for 4 years, but he was a starter for 2. And, really was, again, a day 3 guy coming into his last year, throws for 60 touchdowns, gets drafted number 1. So, you wonder, like, it can happen, but it's, there's a lot of questions. And I think that, again, in my opinion, outside of Williams and May, and even May, there's some questions, I think, too. But, there's a lot of question marks with all of the quarterbacks. And, maybe the best bet is to take Marvin Harrison Jr. Shoot, maybe it's to do what Murph and a lot of other people want and trade back to 5 or 6 and draft Joe Walt. You know what I mean? Like,
you don't like
I don't want it, but maybe that's the best thing to do, especially if Robert Kraft's going to be cheap and not re-sign Mike Onwenu.
Yeah. I guess and this is a biased perspective, and maybe it's too prevalent in the league, because I think it is prevalent in the league. I so respect guys that play against the best competition.
Yeah.
And I think it matters. I think it really, really matters. And I think Drake May having a good year, a couple years in the ACC is nice. I don't think it's as impressive. Like, it's I want to be careful what I say here, but like it's just different, you know. The Pac-12 is not the SEC, and so maybe I weigh that too much.
Well, because
but there are things you can get away with against some of that, you know. And listen, the teams that those guys played with aren't as good either, so they had to be superheroes. But there are things you can get away with, I think, in those conferences that you can't get away with against SEC defenses. I really do think it's just a different level.
Yeah.
And I think that does have an effect on the quarterback play.
The flip side, I think, is that you look at the last two, big quarterbacks come out of the SEC, and you're looking at Bryce Young and Mac Jones, and you look at, I think of ACC quarterback, I think Trevor Lawrence. When I think Pac-12 quarterback, I think Justin Herbert. So I think, I don't know. I feel like if you're a good quarterback, it'll just show up on tape regardless of what conference you end up playing.
There's a lot.
Josh Allen comes out of the Mountain West. And where's Texas Tech? I don't even know. I don't know college football enough to know where Texas Tech is. Big 12, right? Yeah. So,
I don't know. I think if you're physically, and these guys are the guys this year that are coming out of the Pac-12 and the ACC are physical freaks. But all those guys we just mentioned, Mahomes, Herbert, Lawrence, are physical freaks. The other two guys are not. So if you in terms of the Alabama quarterbacks that you mentioned coming out,
right
now, Joe Burrow's not really a physical freak either, but he's a good player. I think it just comes down to once you get in the league, how you're handled too. Again, I hate to bring up Mac Jones for like the 15th time in this podcast, because he's probably not even going to be on the team. But that was not viewed as a bad pick after it happened. It's now viewed as a bad pick because the offensive structure was. Yeah.
Well, everyone thought he was going 3. Never mind 15.
Yeah. So you're right about Bryce Young and Mac Jones, but like the Mac Jones one. And like the Trevor Lawrence one, I'm not even sure that one's worked out yet. I mean, he has the ability clearly to make great throws. We're still waiting for him to be a great quarterback.
Yeah.
And
we'll see what happens. I think the other possibility here to talk about, you mentioned kind of situation and what happens with the quarterback. I think we've kind of seen a common theme here that generally the quarterbacks who sit their first year end up doing better, guys who can sit and learn. And it does make me wonder here, if you're New England and you don't love any of these guys, do you take a Marvin Harrison Jr. in the first round and whatever quarterback is there in the second? Michael Penix, Bo Nix, that's somebody Dan Brugler had the Patriots taking. You throw J.J. McCarthy's name in the mix because I don't really have any idea where he's going to go in this thing. Do you consider, we're going to get a number 1 wide receiver, a guy who, has Hall of Fame upside of the position, go sign Jacoby Brissett this offseason, and let Brissett and some guy in the second round compete for a job and maybe sit your rookie for the first year and then see where you're at after a season?
You could definitely do that, and that might end up being the best thing to do. I just, and it's hard, right? Like, we haven't followed a team that's been in this position. And so it's going to come down to how they evaluate these guys.
Yeah.
But if you think one of these top 3 guys is a franchise quarterback, you can't pass it up.
No. You have to take them.
You just can't. Like, you don't get the opportunity to take these guys.
100%. And next year's class, now again, who knows, right? But next year's class doesn't look as strong. Quinn Ewers is probably coming out next year. Shedeur Sanders, who I love, Shedeur Sanders will probably come out next year. But will you be bad enough to get one of those guys if they're going to go, in the top 3? We don't know that, right? There's no guarantee, right? I think the other thing for me, I almost feel like if you want to do everything but the quarterback, just punt it and take a guy like Spencer Rattler or a guy like who's the kid from FSU, Jordan Travis, or, somebody like that, where you're looking at it saying, all right, we're drafting this guy in the 4th, 5th round. And I know that's obviously it's not ideal, but you're talking about a guy that is even Joe Milton, who I don't like Joe Milton, but like even a guy like that, where it's like, let's just see what he's got. Draft him late, see if you can develop him for a year under a veteran quarterback. Maybe it doesn't work out. And if it doesn't work out, guess what? You're back in the top 10 with an opportunity to draft a guy next year. But in the meantime, you've added a number one wide receiver. You've added a left tackle. You've added things like that you wouldn't have been able to get if you drafted a quarterback at 3, and maybe even trade back to 5 or 6. And now you've added more pieces for next year, right? So I don't know. We'll see.
I think it's also worth noting here as we sit here right before divisional round weekend, 8 teams playing in it. Only one of them got their quarterback by drafting him, in the top 5. A lot of these guys, we look at Josh Allen, you look at Patrick Mahomes, that they traded up to go get him. Lamar Jackson, they traded up, but he was their second first-round pick, I believe. And you go over to the NFC, and you got, some former number 1 overall picks who those teams got as veterans. So I think you see a whole lot of ways to get a quarterback, and it brings you back to the Justin Fields of it all. What does his market look like this offseason? Is that somebody you think you could bring in? Then you look at anybody who could be available via trade as potential options. I don't think the Cardinals are moving off of Kyler Murray, but in a world where they wanted to, is that something you feel is worth exploring to get a guy who has that talent, potentially a discount in the trade market? Obviously, you got to pay a lot contract wise. But I think you see a lot of different ways to skin the cat if you look at the playoffs this year. And I think you look at that, and as New England, you shouldn't be locked into any one approach other than trying to get the guy who you think best helps your team at number 3. And I think, like Phil said, if you think there's a franchise quarterback, nothing helps your team better than that. You have to pull the trigger if that's the case. If you don't, you go with some other option.
Yeah, the interesting thing about that is, we used to call that the quarterback tree. What falls off, you just see what falls from the quarterback tree. Maybe you get a trade, for a team that thinks the guy sucks, and you trade away nothing and end up with a guy who ends up actually being pretty good. Or you sign a free agent that people don't want, because generally speaking, if quarterbacks get to the free agent market, it's because somebody didn't want them. So that to me it is obviously viable because we're seeing it, as you just mentioned. Not all these guys were drafted in the top 5. They're not franchise. They weren't acquired by their current teams to be, face of the franchise, quote unquote, types of guys. But what gives you the best odds to hit? Is it to use that number 3 pick asset, or is it saying, well, shit, I hope some team gives up on a quarterback who's halfway decent, and then we can somehow end up with them and maybe go to the Super Bowl if the rest of our roster looks good. It's not. While it is possible, it's hard to plan for, I guess, is the best way to put it. So it's a little unsettling to go about it that way. You have to be really confident in your abilities to run a sound front office and pounce on those opportunities whenever you get them and seek out those opportunities. Like the Rams did to get Stafford, honestly, and the Lions kind of lucked out in that, Jared Goff, who they got paid for taking on, they got assets for taking on Jared Goff. He was a negative asset in that deal. And now, he's a game away from the conference championship game. So it's like, was that the Lions put themselves in this position by building a good roster around him? But was the plan to go to a Super Bowl with Jared Goff for Detroit? Probably not. Of course not. There's some luck involved here too. So, it's opportunity and timing and being ready to pounce on those opportunities when they present themselves. And so you shouldn't be intimidated by that, I guess. But I guess from a fan's perspective, and I could see from an ownership perspective, really hard to bank on that as our plan. We're just going to build the rest of the roster, and then Robert Kraft, we'll find. Don't worry, we'll figure it out at quarterback. Right. What do you mean you'll figure it out at quarterback? That's a tough sell.
Well, I think you look at the Chiefs and the Bills right now as 2 teams that they built winning teams by finding other ways to get the quarterback. So you got Alex Smith there for the Chiefs, who you're able to do that. And I forget who the Bills had specifically right before Josh Allen, but they did cycle through
Tyrod Taylor.
Tyrod
Taylor.
And Fitzpatrick. And I think they were 10-6 the year that they drafted Josh Allen or something like that. The note is that both of those got to be winning teams and then traded up for a quarterback that they really liked and felt good about, which there's going to be risk involved here, no matter what move the Patriots make. I get a little bit concerned about the risk of whiffing on a quarterback inside the top 3. That's how you end up back inside the top 3 in a hurry.
What the Chiefs did was they were in the same position that the Patriots are now in 2013, and they signed Alex Smith, and they drafted a tackle at number 1 overall, who just kind of ended up being okay.
Yeah.
And Eric Fisher. Yeah. But they got a new coach, a new quarterback that they signed via free agency, and a left tackle at the top of the draft. And so that's a path the Patriots could pursue if they really wanted. I don't know who Alex Smith would be in the free agent market this year, but Baker Mayfield. Well, Baker Mayfield would be the best comp, right? As another fellow former number 1 overall pick. Different styles, I guess, but that's a path to pursue. It's just, boy, if you feel good about the quarterbacks up there, it's tough to pass on them.
Yeah, that's the thing. If the guy is there, you have to draft him. If you look at the draft, and the Chiefs may have looked at that 2013 draft, and I guess, I can go back and take a look at it, but I don't know what that 2013 draft looks like, right? Is there a guy in the draft that you look at and say, oh man, like you really missed it by not drafting that quarterback, whoever it was? And, well, here we go right here. The first quarterback taken in 2013, do you know who it was?
It was E.J. Manuel.
E.J. Manuel. So that's the thing, is that they're in a different situation than the Patriots were, because the second quarterback that gets taken is Geno Smith. So, there's not really that high-end level of quarterback. But you're right. The comp of where they are is comparable to what the Patriots are.
And you know what else is comparable?
Have the quarterbacks.
Yeah. You know what else is comparable? I believe that 2013 Chiefs team is the one that went an entire year without a touchdown pass to a wide receiver.
Yeah.
Which
still managed
is something.
To win.
Yeah, no, they were still a decent team that year, which I feel like that is a sentiment, at least, that feels familiar to Patriots fans, is what we've seen the last couple of seasons.
Yeah. And so, you and Old Man Mom's talking about Russell Wilson, which is a possibility. I think it's unlikely, but it's a possibility. And so, those are all kind of things that are up in the air. But it is going to be, that's what makes this offseason so fascinating. And that's what makes really this time of year, which, was always kind of like ho-hum. Like, I love the draft. I pay attention to the draft. I know, Phil, you feel the same way. Like, I'm all in on the draft. I love it. I like sit down, I'm breaking down film, and I'm looking at guys, and I'm highlights and this and that, and I'm reading articles, and I'm doing, 15 mock drafts a day on, you know what I mean? But for the Patriots, it was always like, okay, they'll draft someone at the end of the first round and like whatever, and I want the guy to be good, but now it's like they got the number 3 pick, and they have $100 million in cap space, and they need a quarterback, a wide receiver, and a tackle. Like, holy crap, they have like a ton of work to do. And so this is really interesting and exciting. And, everyone wants them to do a million different things, and who knows what the hell they're going to do, but it's going to be great. It's going to be fun. And I think it's going to be a fun few months. And we just hope that, May comes and the Patriots are in a significantly better position than they're in right now. I don't know if that's going to be the case, but that's what I'm hoping.
They're not in a better position than they are right now, Pat.
They're got problems. Yeah, that's very true. That is very true. All right, Phil, listen, we're going to let you go. This has been a fantastic conversation.
Yes,
We've kept you incredibly late, but we appreciate you coming through. Listen, I'm telling you right now, if you listen to this show, you better be listening to the Next Pat's podcast. I don't know what you're doing if you're listening to me and not him. But Next Pat's is great. You always have on the dude who runs, what the hell's the guy? I can't think of his name. I want to say Eager, but that's not right. The guy who runs the Senior Bowl, Jim Nagy. Jesus. You always have Jim Nagy on to talk. I'm assuming he's coming on again with you. Last year, you had the guy that ran the Shrine Bowl on as well. That was interesting.
Eric Galco.
And then, yes. Mm-hmm. And so, it's a great show. And obviously, you do a million things over there. So before you leave, everyone knows who you are anyways, but plug all your stuff anyways before you go.
Boy, well, thank you. It's very kind of you to say that. And I appreciate anybody who's listening to the Next Pat's podcast. That is a labor of love. I have such a blast doing that, finding people to talk to that are going to teach us things about not only people in the draft, but people in free agency, people on the Patriots roster when we're thinking about, trying to project things forward for a lot of these guys. We did a cool series last year where we went position by position, and we wanted to find guys. We talked to Rob Ninkovich, James White, and Devin McCourty about, okay, what do you need? What do you need to be a Patriots third down back? What do you need to be a Patriots outside linebacker? What do you need to be a Patriots free safety? And then I paired players with the descriptions that were given to me by the Patriots legends, quote unquote, that were with me on that one. And we nailed the Keon White pick. Keon White fit Rob Ninkovich's description for an edge defender of Bill Belichick's defense to a T. Now, the problem is, guys, Bill Belichick's not here anymore.
Right.
So all of our Patriots prototypes are like maybe out the window. So that's going to be really interesting. I'm wondering if the way to approach it this year, we do our prototypical Patriot series before the draft every year, is to try to keep it consistent and just see, because there's Belichick guys in the front office. There's a Belichick guy who's the head coach. Maybe they're going to be looking for the same thing. So we'll try to keep it consistent maybe this year, and then next year, if we need to change it drastically, we'll change it drastically. But all that stuff is so much fun for me. NBCSportsBoston.com, at Phil A. Perry on Twitter. Next Pat's podcast, Patriots Talk podcast with Tom Curran twice a week still, because things are still busy. We're going to the Super Bowl for the week. So early edition will be out there. Boston Sports Tonight will be out there for that as well. And I'll be on Zolak and Bertrand tomorrow from 12 to 1 for my normal Friday hit. And yeah,
love it.
We got a lot to do. There's a lot going on. So I appreciate you letting me, tell the people where they need to go to be as annoyed as humanly possible.
I love it. I love it, man. And I'll tell you what, you've gotten a lot of hate over the last, few weeks or whatever. And I'm like, people hating on Phil. I'm like, what the heck? People hating on Phil Perry? Like, come on. But I'm like, he must be doing something right, because people are pissed. You know what I mean? And it's just it rubs off on everyone, unfortunately, this time of year, especially when you're that bad. And it was cool seeing you in Pittsburgh on the field. Just a wild coincidence when I had the pregame passes and you just happened to be there. That was fun. Hanging out before the game.
What a night. I love Pittsburgh. That's my favorite setting for away games.
It was so cool. And winning that game was great, but now it's funny because if we had lost that game, we'd be drafted number 2 instead of number 3. So, it's just, what are you going to do?
Yeah. Wait, Phil, have you been to a baseball game there in Pittsburgh?
I have not. The stadium looks awesome, but I have never been.
I highly recommend.
Yeah.
Okay.
We did a tour the next day. It was incredible. Obviously,
phenomenal
no game,
view.
It was awesome.
Yeah, phenomenal view. Not that expensive. The quality of the baseball may not always be the highest, but
But I think those people they love their sports, and everything's downtown, and you can walk from your hotel usually, and be right there. It's great. Love it.
It was great. Well, thanks, Phil. We appreciate it, man. And we'll talk to you again soon. Hey, listen, anytime you want to come back on, you let me know. There's always a spot here for you if you want to come back on.
Always a good time chatting with you guys. Thanks so much for having me. We'll talk soon for sure.
All right, man. Take care.
All right, bye.
All right. Whew, man, what a flipping interview. That guy is the best. Just the best.
This is a marathon of a show. We're starting to turn this into a 2-hour radio window right here.
Yeah, no, it's not. No, it's not great. No, we got to fly through the last few things. So we're just all we're gonna do right now is we're gonna pick the playoff team. We're gonna pick the playoff games. There's only 4 of them. I'll tell you the results of what we did last week as well. We're not doing. There's no competition or anything like that here. We're just picking them. That's all. And then we'll do this week in sports. You do the trivia question. We'll do this week in sports history, and we'll get you guys the heck out of here. People are in the chat. Chat's been blowing up. We appreciate you guys. And
got a ton of people in here tonight. We love it.
Yep. It's great. So, all right. Last week, here's what I'll tell you. Last week,
this could be so painful to hear, man. I whiffed big time.
Yeah, last week Matt had the Browns -2.5 loss, Chiefs -4.5 win, Steelers +10.5 loss, Cowboys -7 loss, Rams +3 win, and Bucks +3 also win. So that's
3-3.
3-3. Yep. And so I also went 3-3. I had the Browns as well, lost. Chiefs win, Steelers lost. I had the Packers +7.
Easy win.
Okay. Lions -3. Lions won, but didn't cover. And then I had the Bucks +3 as well. Same as you. So this week, Matt, who you got? Let's see. Hold on. I'll give you the lines right now. You got the lines in front of you?
I got them up.
Okay.
From our friends over at FanDuel. First game, as always, in the Saturday late afternoon spot in the playoffs, it's the Texans. You know, they weren't playing any other window. Texans at Ravens. Ravens favored by 9.5. Where are you going with this one?
I think I'm going to go Texans. It's 8 and 9.5 points is a crap ton of points, and they've been playing their butts off. They might get blown out, but I'm banking on the fact that they won't. So I'm going plus 9.5 for the Texans.
I'll go the other way then, and we'll have some fun. Give me the Ravens. They're really good this year.
They are.
Like that's a
Lamar hasn't played in like 3 weeks, so but
yeah,
who knows?
Yeah. Good.
No, go ahead.
Okay. The late game on Saturday, Packers at Niners, same spread, another 1 seed favored by 9.5 points. I'm going to take the Packers on this to cover. I don't think they win, but I do think they cover.
There you go. Look at that. And it's funny. I'm doing the exact opposite. I'm taking San Francisco. This was not planned. I'm taking San Francisco plus -9.5. I just think San Fran's a wagon there, and they're going to steamroll the Packers. They might not. The Packers played really well, but I think they played above their heads against the Cowboys, and I don't think that happens again against San Fran.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. I'm very intrigued to see that one. We'll head over to Sunday. The Lions, in that cold outdoor environment.
That's outrageous. What an outrageous question that was.
Hilarious. Hosting the Buccaneers as 6.5 point favorites. Which in this old NFC Central rivalry, which way are you going?
I'm going Tampa. Tampa plus 6.5, only because I feel like Detroit plays it close. I feel like every game Detroit plays is a close game. And so that's why I'm going Tampa. I still think Detroit wins, but I think it's going to be less than a touchdown because that's how Detroit plays games, I think, at least. And so there we go.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think Tampa keeps it close. I wouldn't be shocked to see Tampa win this one either. I think there's some matchup stuff, at least for Tampa's offense, where they're going to be able to score and keep this competitive. And
you're right. I'd be sad, but you're right.
Yeah. Well, I think Tampa going on is fun. I don't think either of these teams on the road is beating San Francisco anyway. I think the only hope for one of these teams is going to be if the Packers end up getting through and they get to host an NFC Championship game, which neither of us think is what's going to happen on Saturday night.
Yes, that's correct. That is correct. All right, and last game.
Chiefs at Bills. Maybe the most exciting game of the weekend. Bills 2.5 point favorites at home. Do they finally get the playoff revenge on Patrick Mahomes?
No, I'm going KC plus 2.5. It's not happening.
I'm agreed.
I think I'll tell you, as much as I don't like Mahomes and the Chiefs, it would be hilarious if the Bills sat there and said, "Oh, we've done this and we've done that. We've always played them here. We get screwed by the refs, and we always play in Kansas City." Blah, 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 blah.
Overtime rules.
And you finally get them at home and you lose anyways. I'd love it. I'd absolutely love it. It'd be great. So that's what I'm rooting for to happen. I don't know what's going to happen. Casey's not that great this year, but I do think it'd be nice.
Well, the Bills are incredibly banged up right now.
Very true. Very true.
And that's, if Mac Jones can dice up that defense, I think Mahomes can do it even with some of those weapons out there. So I'm gonna take the Chiefs. I think they're the better team here. Even though we saw the Bills go out to Arrowhead and win earlier this year, I think that was more the product of the Chiefs being a little bit down then, the Bills starting to surge then. And I think the Bills team that's out there right now, they got all the injuries early this season. And defensively, they finally figured out what they were doing. And now a lot of those guys are hurt. And I think it's really hard to make another adjustment on this short a turnaround to figure out what you want to do. So we're in agreement for the Sunday games. We're opposite for the Saturday games.
That's fun. That's fun. What the heck, we got. I got 3. I'm picking 3 underdogs. I love it. Love it.
Yeah.
So,
trivia question, and then
we'll do this week in sports history, and we'll get the heck out of here. It's 11:30 already. So
yeah. All right. Last week's question: which team did the New England Patriots host in Bill Belichick's first game as head coach? Of the Patriots. The answer was the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Thad Skywalker had that one. And the bonus question on it, who scored New England's first touchdown in that game. Thad Skywalker also had this one. It was Troy Brown with a punt return. And I don't think there's a more fitting way for Bill Belichick's tenure with the team to start than a special teams touchdown from Troy Brown, franchise legend. The question tonight, we're going to the new head coach, Gerard Mayo. He recorded his first career interception in 2011 against which former Indianapolis Colts quarterback?
Oh, okay. All right. There we go.
Yeah, throw your answers in the chat there while we figure that. Do you know this one, Pat? Do you think you know this one?
So I have an idea just because I feel like the obvious answer probably isn't correct. And so I am thinking that it was a guy that was there for a long time and never really played, and so that's who I think it might be.
Okay,
I might be wrong about that, but that's who I think it might be.
If I'm remembering correctly, this game was the one. This is the one where Gronk broke his forearm on the field goal protection unit.
Yeah,
it was a weird game. I as a kid, I watched this game on like a small TV at my great grandparents' house. Some family party, and I was sitting in front of a TV that was about the size of my laptop is now, trying to watch this game on that one.
Yeah, that was a tough game. I remember I was at this game, as I am at all these games, but I went with my uncles and we went to a tailgate before, and I remember they were excited to come and see Peyton Manning, and Manning I think was hurt or something or whatever. And so I don't remember. I'm looking it up now, but I don't remember. Oh, someone did get it.
We do have a correct answer in the chat.
Yeah. So I didn't remember it was him that started, but he had a heck of a game. Whew.
Yeah, that was a close game.
Yeah.
Relatively speaking. That 2011 Patriots defense.
DJ's guess was my guess, which was incorrect, but that's okay.
Yeah. So we'll announce the correct answer on our show next week.
Yes. Yes. So, all right. Here we go. This week in sports history, and then we are out of here.
And now for something we think you'll really like. This week in sports history.
All right. Okay. You want to go first? Or you want me to go first?
I'll take it.
All right.
I got a great one on my page today calendar here. We got a Bruins one on my page today calendar.
Okay.
Yeah. On this day, January 18th, 1964, the Bruins stun the Maple Leafs 11-0 at Maple Leaf Gardens. Boston enters the fray with a 9-24-8 record. The Leafs were at 21-13-6. Bruins scored 6 times on 7 shots in the first period against goalie Don Simmons, who played the entire game.
Tough game.
Gary Dornhofer kicked off the fray with a goal 53 seconds in. Andy Habenton and Dean Prentice each scored 3 goals. Murray Oliver scored twice. Dornhofer, Johnny Busic, and Jean-Guy Gendron each had a goal.
Golly. That's
11-0.
That's just rough, dude. It's a rough night. That's a burn the tape one. That's a burn the tape game for sure.
Yeah, I know.
All right. Mine is also from today, January 18th, 1951. Very relevant for one of the current playoff teams. Because on January 18th, 1951, the NFL ruled tackles, guards, and centers ineligible for a forward pass. Had that not happened, the Detroit Lions would have been in the number 2 seed instead of the number 3 seed. But
imagine a game in which all the players on the field were eligible to receive a forward pass.
Incredible. You imagine? That'd be awesome. Just absolute chaos with like snapping it and then just everyone running. That'd be outrageous. Imagine like a 10-man route.
You know what? I'm a little surprised we haven't seen happen. And we saw, an attempt at this last year, which didn't really, work out with the Cowboys having Zeke snap it. we really have not seen a lot of tries of when a team needs a lateral play. You go out there with a quarterback, or not even necessarily a quarterback. You just go out there with your 11 best athletes,
11 fastest guys. Yeah.
Yeah, and try to throw the ball around and make something happen.
Right, because
Obviously,
you're going to
the
get rid
offense-
of it instantly.
Yeah, and obviously the issue with that last year was that the Cowboys got rid of it instantly by throwing a quick slant, and the defense knew they had to get rid of it fast and just sat all over it. So
Right.
that's probably part of it. I think I wonder too, if you're trying to do that, and let's say it's the Patriots, bring a guy like Joe Cardona out there for the snaps, somebody who's a little more athletic than your center, but who has blocking experience and can get down the field and also can snap the football.
Not a terrible idea. Not a terrible idea. Something we should look into. So,
Yeah.
well, we know, but maybe we'll pass that information along to those that actually could do something about it. Or scream into the void until someone hears us. We could do that too. So, all right.
It's worked so far.
Yes, that's true. That is true. Speaking of working so far, Matt St. Jean with a mega viral tweet. Couldn't finish the show without mentioning this. Just an absolutely incredible tweet. We are at just so we're all on the same page, just so everyone understands here. Right now, we are at 1.8 million views, 14,000 likes, 745 reposts, 34 quotes. And Matt's iconic tweet is a quote tweet of Bill Belichick's second interview. And it says, the Falcons blowing a 2-interview lead on hiring Bill Belichick if he goes elsewhere would be truly hysterical. And just the subtlety of the comedy. Fantastic. Just hits the sweet spot. Not too over the top, not too ridiculous, but absolutely amazing. Just found the algorithm and people went nuts on it, and you love to see it. You love to see it.
When I came up with 2-interview lead, when that popped into my head, I thought I had something. I didn't think it was going to catch on like this. But
Right.
And it does, at this point, appear like the Falcons are going to finish off the job there.
Yes, it does. It sure
doesn't seem like anybody else is in this conversation right now, unless we're waiting to see what happens this weekend with other teams. But Cowboys sticking with Mike McCarthy. We haven't heard anything on Nick Sirianni in Philly.
Sounds like he's coming back, is what it sounds like.
Yeah. So, I think we're going to see Bill in Atlanta, which I do think is fun.
Yeah.
And maybe
at the
they
very
sign
least, it's fun, right?
Maybe they go after Kirk Cousins and they bring out Josh McDaniels and Side note, I will say I want to add a couple other quarterback things before we go. Type a couple loose ends here. One, I was having a conversation with Taylor Kyles on Twitter last night, and we were both coming to the same conclusion that hypothetically, if the Patriots were to bring Josh McDaniels back, we actually liked the fit with Drake May a lot. Some of the things he is capable of doing and did,
Makes
and
sense.
the fact that May is a big and mobile quarterback, and you can do some of the Cam Newton stuff from 2020, some of the run game stuff.
Right.
He's a guy who's a good enough runner to utilize that, which I thought was interesting. And the other thing, we talk about, bringing one of these guys from LA, the Rams, in. It's like Zach Robinson as your offensive coordinator. You want to take a shot at a quarterback, but you don't love somebody in the first round, and you want somebody who can just sit back there and execute an offense and throw the ball where it's supposed to be on time. Bo Nix in the second round isn't something I hate. I don't love him as a prospect. He's pretty good under pressure. Can make all the throws. He's a good enough athlete. He can run. He's got really bad tape at Auburn. He's been a not very smart player for a lot of his college career, but he seems to have been coached up really well at Oregon. And if you have a guy who can do that, and he's a guy who can do the short throws and you can bootleg and do all the fancy stuff they like to do in those Ram style offenses. I don't think he's a guy you win a Super Bowl with, but I do think he's a guy you can win football games with if things go right for you. And maybe that gets you going in the right direction. Maybe he isn't your Patrick Mahomes, but he could be your Alex Smith level guy. And that's somebody. Dane Brugler had the Patriots going Marvin Harrison Jr., Bo Nix in his last draft, and doesn't thrill me. Really, none of the quarterbacks outside the top two thrill me, but it makes some sense, and I can get behind it as a short-term option and a relatively low risk in the second round.
True. Yeah. And look, I don't necessarily hate it. I just feel like if you're, there are right now, if you listen to people that know what they're talking about, there's an argument between tackles 3 and 10 as to who the best one is. And
Yeah.
you got to assume one or two of those guys are going to be available at 34. You know what I mean? And I don't know if any of those guys are going to be available in the open market. And so, I almost feel like if I'm going to take a shot in the dark at a quarterback, I'd rather do it with a veteran than Bo Nix. And maybe Bo Nix turns out to be really good and proves me wrong, but that's kind of how I feel about it,
And I think, realistically, you're only going to get 2 shots here at the top of the draft where you feel really good about the picks. And you got 3 spots on offense where you need guys. Wide receiver, offensive tackle, quarterback. So you're not going to fill all of those with premium picks unless you trade back and are able to pick up extra picks in there.
Yep.
Which means you're requiring a less premium option at the top, although still a guy you're going to like a lot.
Yeah.
And what that means is that you got to do some work in free agency and feel good, not great, but decent about all 3 spots before you hit the draft, because you're missing on one of them, and you don't necessarily know which one of those it's going to be until we get to 11 o'clock on Friday night of the draft.
Correct. Very correct. Yeah. So we'll see. But all right. Well, this has been enough of that. We're going to get into all that stuff again for months. And so we will get back and forth and talk about it and go through. And of course, at some point, Chicago's going to make a decision on their quarterback, and the Patriots are going to either move up to 1 or someone else move up to 1, or Justin Fields is going to get traded, or something is going to happen. So we'll see.
Fall.
Yep. And so there's a lot of draft talk coming your way, people. Thank you so much for the chat today. You guys were blowing up. We had like 250 people live at one point with conversation going on in the chat. We see all your comments. We can't get to all of them, but we see them all. We appreciate you guys. We love you guys, and thanks for coming through.
There was a question in there about whether or not I went to Michigan. By the way, I did not. I'm just a fan.
Michigan fan. That's correct. Yes.
Yeah,
that's correct.
That's not why I like McCarthy. I believe, say on this podcast at one point that I was not a fan of his, and I didn't really come back around on McCarthy until the Alabama game. That's when I started to come back around and see some of the upside.
It's a good point. Also, Dilly C. Dilly here. Xavier Leggett. Is it Leggett? Leggett. That's what I thought. There's so many good wide receivers in the draft. So many.
Oh, yeah.
That's why I almost feel like if you're at 3 and you take a quarterback at 3, you can get a guy that could turn into a number 1 wide receiver, or at least a high-end wide receiver 2 at the top of the second round. You remember that T. Higgins went in the top of the second round when they drafted Joe Burrow. And so, you look at that and think, well, you could do the same thing here. You could draft Jaden Daniels or whomever it is you trade up for, or whoever you draft, you get that guy at the top of the second round, and that could solve that problem,
Yeah, I will say I really like Xavier Leggett's tape. His tape against Georgia in particular. There's some good stuff. There's not a lot of guys as big as he is who have some of the movement skills that he has. My only concern with him is that he has been at South Carolina for 4 years, and he was basically a backup for his first 3 seasons before doing this. And a lot of his games being bigger and stronger than the guys around him. And I'm going to have some questions there as to why it took him until year 4 to get to where he is. He's a guy I think I'd like in the 3rd round. I'm not sure I'd like him in the 2nd. I think I'd like the value on some other guys there.
And that's the thing.
His tape's a fun watch, regardless of if you're looking at him. Like, just go watch a highlight reel of Xavier Leggett, and you're going to have a good time.
Yeah. So we'll see, and we'll, and like I say, we're going to break down all these guys. I'm going to go back and forth, and I think what we should do is kind of devote shows to positions and whatever. We're going to get into a whole bunch of stuff. Don't worry. So anyways, that's what we got. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. We're approaching 2 hours here. We still got people in here, and we appreciate you guys. Love you guys.
You guys are amazing.
We'll talk to you. I think we'll talk to you Sunday night after.
Go after the Bills Chiefs, right? Because that's a 6 o'clock, 6:30 game.
6 o'clock. Yes, good point. So we'll go after Bills Chiefs and do a quick wrap up of that, and kind of go from there. And you never know, something else might happen this weekend. So anyways, guys, thank you so much. We appreciate you, and we'll talk to you Sunday night.